Well, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is with us this morning. Good morning. How are you? How would Labour deal with the migrant crisis?
Drop the gimmicks and focus on three specific things. One is speeding up the speed at which decisions are made on applications. So fewer than 1% of small boat arrivals applications have been processed in the last year. That's unacceptable. Secondly, send people back immediately when their claims are failed. The numbers there are down 80% compared to when Labour left office 13 years ago. And thirdly, we've got to smash these criminal gangs. Many of them, as Sky News has found, are based here in our country. And sometimes this challenge is about working with other countries, but sometimes these are problems of our own making. And we can't blame the French for our failed bureaucracy. We can't blame the Germans for the fact that we've got criminal gangs operating in our country that we're not dealing with. Instead of wasting what will end up being hundreds of millions of pounds on a failed Rwanda scheme, let's put that money into the National Crime Agency to sweep these people off our streets and get them behind bars so they can stop exploiting vulnerable people trying to get to a safe haven.
Easier said than done. If it was that easy, the government would have done it, they would say.
You think so, Kay, but they keep on going after these headline-grabbing gimmicks that won't work. I mean, take this proposal that anyone arriving via small boats should be given a blanket ban. Well, firstly, how are they going to identify these people for the future? They're going to tattoo their foreheads saying not welcome in Britain so that we recognise them if they come back under a different name? I don't think so. Secondly, we know that there have been people who've come via small boats from Afghanistan, even though there's meant to be a safe route, who are veterans who have fought for this country. Are we going to say, oh, sorry, mate, I know you fought for Britain, but back you go because you've come via a small boat? And sometimes, I know it's not as exciting as the headlines the government's trying to create, but getting the processes right is important. I mean, the fact that we've only had 22 people come via the Afghan resettlement scheme Pathway 2 compared to more than 8,500 who've come via small boats tells us that the systems the government are putting in place aren't working, and they should roll their sleeves up and focus on solving the problem rather than generating headlines in the hope that voters will be duped into thinking the government after 13 years are going to get this right.
Well, the PM says she's going to do that, and we'll find out what the detail is later on this week. In the meantime, we'll also be finding out what's going on with Sue Gray. When did Sue Gray start talking to Sir Keir?
I don't know is the honest answer. She's going to have to disclose that as part of the...
Have you asked the question?
No, I haven't. I've spoken to Keir over the weekend, but Sue Gray's going to have to disclose that as part of the process. This is not new. Ed Llewellyn, who was David Cameron's chief of staff, was a senior diplomat before going to work for David Cameron.
Yeah, but he did bring down a prime minister in the process.
But nor did Sue Gray, actually.
Well,
she was asked by Boris Johnson to do an inquiry. He lauded her integrity when he asked her to do it, as have, by the way, many decent Conservatives in recent days said, hang on a minute, you know, Conservative colleagues, calm down. This is not unusual, and she is a professional civil servant who's worked well with Labour and Conservative ministers. She's not breached confidences. There's no reason to expect she'll do so now. I can understand why there's some sour grapes that good people are now wanting to work with Labour because they're hoping and thinking we might be the next government.
Down a prime minister.
No, I don't think that's a fair characterisation, Kay. The person who brought down Boris Johnson was Boris Johnson. Unless she packed the booze into the suitcase and wheeled it into number 10 and said, off you go, lads. I don't think we can blame Sue Gray for that.
I'm guessing that she's a Labour supporter, otherwise she wouldn't want to work for Sir Keir Starmer.
I don't know.
Well, she's not going to be a Tory, is she?
Interestingly, we are attracting lots of support from people who've previously voted Conservative or people who previously worked for the Conservatives. You know, as Ian Anderson, their former LGBT advisor, for example. I think good people across the political spectrum are in despair at this government and their failure and their dishonesty and their lack of integrity, and are wanting to help build the alternative. And for a party that's serious about going from opposition to government, as Labour is, we want to make sure that all the policies that we commit to can work in practice, that we are well prepared to hit the ground running on day one, because this country's problems are so big at the moment that we're not going to have time to waste finding our feet. We're going to have to get cracking on day one, and Sue Gray will help us do that. She's got a process to go through. We've got to let that process take its course, but I very much hope she'll come
When do you feel she became disillusioned with this government?
I don't know. You'd have to ask her.
I'm asking you.
Well, I don't know. I'm not a mind reader. I think I've met Sue Gray once, I think, off the top of my head. So I don't know is the honest answer.
So you, up until we broke the news, I think on Friday, you were not aware that Sue Gray might be the next Chief of Staff?
Nope.
Wow.
I'm not involved in,
Wow.
Keir's chief of staff
So
appointment.
Sir Keir Starmer does not communicate with his top table about who might be the next chief of staff?
I would not expect Keir to ask for my approval or anyone else's.
It's not about asking for approval, it's about discussing who might be
no, I think Keir was very,
Minister.
very clear with the shadow cabinet and with the wider team that what he was looking for in the next chief of staff was someone who could do the serious work on preparation for government. We've got a campaigns director for the general election who's focused on winning the election. I think Keir wants his chief of staff to focus on the serious work of preparing for government so that, frankly, we don't end up in the shambolic mess of the Conservatives, who even after 13 years of practising still don't seem to have got it right.
Let's wait and see how that story develops. Can you at least acknowledge that the optics are not great?
I don't think anyone really cares beyond the Westminster bubble.
What a load of nonsense.
No, come on,
Oh,
Kay.
come on.
Beyond some foaming at the mouth lunatics on the Conservative right who are looking for any excuse to rehabilitate Boris Johnson because they hate Rishi, think Rishi stabbed Boris.
She put together a report that this previous Prime Minister could not come back from. Now she's decided to walk across the divide and represent, if I may, and represent your leader who may be the next Prime Minister.
But when the Sue Gray report was published, Boris Johnson basically claimed it was some sort of vindication of his position.
Well, we all knew it wasn't.
I don't think...
You can't have your cake and eat it.
But neither can Boris Johnson. Hang on a second. I don't think there's anything that we've seen or heard that suggests that she's not a professional civil servant who behaves with the utmost integrity. Don't just take my word for it, or indeed former Labour cabinet ministers who work for her. People like George Osborne, former Chancellor, Francis Maude, who led the Cabinet Office, dealt heavily with the civil service and with Sue Gray.
But you must acknowledge she's Labour-leaning, otherwise why would she come and work for the boss?
I don't think anyone would have had a clue as to her politics, listening to the people who've described working with her. And this, look, just to be clear about the type of role that Keir Starmer wants her to do, it is about preparing for government, making sure that Labour can work effectively across the civil service and pulling the right levers of government to effect the kind of change that we want to see in our country.
But she may find
That's not the same as being a campaigns director trying to win the general election.
But she may find herself in a position where she can't take up that role for up to 2 years.
Well, I think we'd expect there to be a period of gardening leave. I think that's normal in these sorts of situations where you don't jump straight from one job to another. But let's see, there's a process to follow. And look, I hope that Rishi Sunak will ignore the lunatic fringes of his party. I mean, I know he struggles to do that on a daily basis anyway, but I hope that he will do the right thing, behave in the proper way as other Prime Ministers in a position would be. There is a proper process to go through. Let's let Sue Gray go through that process, and let's hope that she's able to make sure the Labour government can hit the ground running on day one, because that's our ambition.
Just before I let you go, maternity wards, that's what you want to talk about?
Yeah. So we've got a massive problem at the moment, 60 maternity wards having to close at points last year because of a shortage of staff. That's 1 in 3. At the heart of this is a chronic shortage of midwives, leaving the profession faster than we can recruit them in many cases. So we've got to do 2 things. One is retain the midwives, which is why the pay negotiations this week are so important. Secondly, we've got to embark on the biggest expansion of NHS staff in history. Labour has a plan to do that, fully costed, fully funded, double the number of medical school places, 10,000 nursing and midwifery clinical training places funded by abolishing the non-dom tax status. A plan so good that even Jeremy Hunt himself said that this government should nick it on the basis that smart governments nick the best ideas of their opponents.